Hello. Oh, I'm gonna try to make this a quick one. I'm here on this Saturday night slash Sunday morning, a little earlier than normal, but I'm really tired today. I woke up really early, ate way too much, took aspirin and melatonin, so I am very sleepy. Oh, excuse me. What am I here talking about? I'm actually talking about something that I tried to talk about a couple weeks ago. Um, I tried to do two of these videos in one night. That was a mistake. I got through the first one, but that second one, man, I think I haven't watched the video I made yet, but pretty sure I just straight up fell asleep. Oh, I just gave up on it. I couldn't even remember what I was doing. I am talking about a series of martial arts movies with, and this is a little different, with some honorable mention extra movies thrown in that I'll get to. I'm talking about the Ip Man series. Ip Man. There were four Ip Man movies. I think the first one was made in like 2008, I believe. Yeah, 2008. I believe the last one was in 2018, which means it came out over 10 years. Yeah, I remember hearing about these movies when they first came out. I remember this guy I used to work with who's a fucking idiot would say, "Yo, you hear about that movie, that IP Man?" His name is spelled IP. He would say it's IP. It's like there's no. It's the first part of his name isn't a fucking acronym. You fucking idiot. He's not a superhero. That's his name, Ip Man. It's not even worth going into, but that guy was really dumb. But yeah, his name's Ip Man. He's played by actor Donnie Yen, who you might have seen in that Star Wars movie Rogue One. That's the only other thing I can think of that he's been in. I think he's going to be in the next John Wick movie too. But he's pretty cool. He's a good martial artist. The character in question, Ip Man, is he's an actual person. He's not a fictional character. He was an actual person who was born, I believe they said, in 1893, and he lived until 1972. He was a martial arts master who specialized in a form of kung fu called Wing Chun, which is like some very like fast, close quarters type fighting style. You have to watch it. I don't know enough about kung fu to describe it, but it's pretty cool looking, and you should watch it to see it. He's an interesting figure because he basically popularized the style of Wing Chun throughout the world and made it recognizable throughout the world. Like, not him independently, but him starting a school and basically teaching a bunch of students and allowing it to spread. His most the thing they bring up constantly, his most famous student was Bruce Lee, who went on to become a famous actor and brought kung fu movies to the United States and basically revolutionized things for Asian actors, particularly here in America. So yeah, that's one of the reasons he's mainly popular. And believe me, they mention that a lot in these movies. Like at the end of each movie, they'll go into like they'll show you like actual pictures of Ip Man, and they'll like give you little details about his life. And like after the first movie, they obviously know they were gonna make a sequel because they were like, how they showed how he taught and how he had a bunch of students, including his most famous students, Bruce Lee. Like they mentioned that a lot. They just mentioned Bruce Lee in passing in the first movie. In the second movie, they show him show up as a little kid wanting to learn kung fu, and then they mention that how it took him on as a student when he was like, I think they said when he was in 1950. Let me look that up. Let me look that up. See if I got that right, because I might have gotten that wrong. Bruce Lee. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, Bruce Lee was born in. He was born in 1940. So, yeah, he was. So yeah, they mentioned how he became a student of Ip Man's school. He wasn't directly taught by Ip Man, but Ip Man was like the grandmaster of the school who taught, and his first 4 students became masters who taught the other students. So it's still basically him. It's his teachings. They mention in the end of the second movie when they give you to like the real information parts, they mention how Bruce Lee becomes a student of Ip Man's school when he's at the age of 16 in 1956. They clearly state that at the end of the second movie. Then in the third movie, they now show Bruce Lee more, but it takes place in 1959, and he's asking to now become a student of Ip Man. It's just like, you just said in the last movie he became a student at the school 3 years earlier. Why is he now asking, like practically begging to become a student at 19 when you already said that he became a student at 16? Also, it didn't look like he was that picky about his students. It was just like, if you were willing to learn from him and could pay the fees, he let you become a student. It didn't seem like he was a very picky guy in that regard, which makes sense. And then the fourth movie is Bruce Lee heavily factors into the story. But I'll get to that. What are the stories of these movies? Well, there's not much to them. It's funny because as I was watching these movies, I had a weird, like, revelation that, like, I had a weird revelation that these kind of kung fu movies, or at least these type of kung fu movies, are a lot like porn. In that the acting is less than stellar. There's not a whole lot to the story, and that the characters are all pretty one-dimensional. And the reason for that is because they know people aren't coming to watch these things. These things just exist to give a certain illusion that a real movie is being made here. Because ultimately, all you want to do is you want to get through the bullshit to get to the good parts. Now, in a porn, the good parts are when all the attractive people start fucking. In a kung fu movie, it's when all the martial artists who are in the films, who don't really know how to act that well, but can all genuinely fight, when they start fighting and showing off all their cool, ridiculous moves. And there's a lot of, like, wire work involved in these movies, because there's definitely a lot of exaggerated jumping and shit, but it looks cool, so you just let it go. And all 4 movies play out like that. And it actually only gets worse as all the movies go on. I mean, they get straight up ridiculous by the 4th movie. But they also all follow, I realize they all follow a very similar method. Every single one of these movies follows the same method. It's the main character, Ip Man, is just trying to quietly do something. Then somehow he gets involved in some kind of mild confrontation with a fellow Chinese person. And they have to have a sort of like a bit of a fight. Not like a major fight, not like a life or death fight, but he's got to fight one of his countrymen. And he usually beats them, and they either just go away or end up becoming a friend of his. But then the real fight in the movie, the real confrontation, is him having to fight some foreign person who's become somehow adversarial to him in some way. So there's like two enemies. There's like a minor enemy who's one of his countrymen who he just has some kind of minor conflict with. And then the major conflict is with a foreign person who wants to challenge his kung fu. They literally all go that way, except for three. Three switches it around a little bit. But the formula still kind of holds true, basically. It's still the same basic formula, but the organization of it gets flipped up a little bit. Like, to give you an example of what I mean, in the first movie, he's not even a teacher yet. He apparently, in the city he grew up in, which was called, I think, Foshan or something like that. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. He was basically a rich kid, and apparently rich, like, back when he learned how to do Wing Chun, he learned at 7, but back in those days, you could only learn it if you were rich, because the fees to get into the school at the time were very high, so only rich people could do it. So that's why he was able to learn this technique, and then he was just a rich guy who lived a rich guy's life. I looked into his actual background a bit, and apparently he spent a lot of time as a cop, and there's even rumors that he was a spy for the Chinese Nationalist political party. But those aren't necessarily confirmed, so you gotta take that shit with a grain of salt. But the main conflict in the movie is, like, first off, he fights like another martial arts master, but that's just kind of a little sparring incident. Then there's another martial arts master that shows up in Foshan and starts challenging all the other martial artists and beating them soundly, but then when he fights Ip Man, he gets his ass handed to him. And it just seems like that's the way things are going to go at first until we get to 1937, when Japan invades China. During World War II. And then they take over a bunch of the country. They take Ip Man's house, because he has a really nice big ass house. And, they basically rape and pillage China, taking their food and resources and their money and leaving them with next to nothing. Then he sort of just has confrontations dealing with the Japanese occupation. He even gets into another fight with the guy Jin, who he fought, the martial artist who started challenging all the other martial artists. His name is Jin. He gets into another fight with him. But ultimately, the last fight is him having to fight the Japanese colonel who's in charge of Foshan during the invasion by Japan. He fights this guy in a public tournament and then gets shot in the shoulder as a result of it. But it's funny in this movie because it just kind of There doesn't seem to be a lot of conflict because this guy just seems too tough. Like, he's just beating the shit out of everybody and like never getting hit himself. I think in the last fight against the Japanese colonel, he like gets hit once, but that's about it. It's like he's just way too fucking good. Now, obviously, this guy went through most of his like career as a martial artist mostly undefeated, but I mean, it's just like bring in some conflict here. A few other funny things about this movie when I looked up this guy's real story. They completely gloss over the fact that he was an opium addict. They just make it seem like, when he's trying to become a teacher, like he tries to become a teacher in the second movie and he's just having a hard time getting people to join or getting them to pay their fees. But in reality, the reason he had such a hard time with money is because he took all the money he got from his school and spent it on opium. Second, I mean, they completely gloss over his family life. In the movie, he only ever has one kid in his family, even though they said that he had 3 sons and 2 daughters. So apparently, even in Chinese cinema, they have a one-child policy. It's kind of a fucked up thing to say, but it's also kind of true, at least in this regard. They show his sons are born years apart, even though it looks like both his sons were born before the invasion of Japan. Which is weird, because the show won't get born after the invasion of Japan in the second movie. They also completely leave out the fact that he has daughters, that he had 2 daughters. Maybe they did that because their story's just too sad. During the Japanese occupation of China, food was very scarce. And a lot of people starved, and apparently both of Ip Man's daughters starved. Like, he went from being the richest guy in town to practically living on the fucking streets. They also said that he didn't leave for Hong Kong until after World War II ended and before the Communist Party came to power in China. Now, in the second movie, he's living in Hong Kong with his pregnant wife and son. Now, here's the thing. His wife never lived with him in Hong Kong. Like, he was living alone in Hong Kong. His family was left back in Foshan, and or what was left of his family. And his wife, because the Communist Party took control, traveled between English-controlled Hong Kong and the Chinese mainland was basically cut off. So his wife was never able to come to Hong Kong, and she ended up dying of cancer in 1960. Now, they actually do address that in the third movie. Spoiler alert, she dies of cancer in the third movie. They also in the movies make it seem like he never taught, like he wasn't going to teach his sons Wing Chun, but like I said, he had 3 sons, and they all ended up becoming Wing Chun masters. So I guess he did teach them, because why wouldn't he? He taught everybody else, why wouldn't he teach his own sons? He only had 2 sons with his wife, but when he was living in Foshan and his wife was stuck in, when his wife was stuck in Foshan and he was living in Hong Kong, he took on a mistress and had a son with her. Information he basically kept from his actual sons when they eventually came to live with him in Hong Kong. Let's see. Oh yeah, in the second movie, like I said, similar formula. Now he's in Hong Kong trying to teach a school. One of his students has confrontation with some other basically gangster like kung fu students who are the students of this other guy who's running kind of like a criminal enterprise out of the fish markets. That guy Jin shows back up again, but only in a much smaller capacity this time around. He has some confrontation with the group of martial artists who operate in Hong Kong. Like you have to join their group to open a school in Hong Kong, but you have to pay fees to them. And Ip just decides, he's like, well, these guys are just trying to take advantage of me. I'm not going to do that. So he has some minor confrontation with the guy who runs that group, but then eventually becomes friends with him. So it's like, whatever. But then this is Hong Kong, which is controlled by England. So you have corrupt police departments running everything. And there's just like this Chinese cop who they just refer to as Fatso, which is just like, that's kind of dismissive. The ultimate conflict is with this English boxer. I think he's supposed to be English. He might have been Australian, I don't know, but the ultimate conflict is with him. He ends up killing the one martial artist guy that Ip became friends with in the ring. And then Ip challenges the boxer guy. And then they fight, and then at the end, the last quarter of Ip Man 2 is basically just Rocky 4. Right down to at the end of the fight, he gives this big speech to this room of combined Chinese and English people, and they applaud him as he leaves, and it's just like, yeah, this is just Rocky 4. This whole thing is just Rocky 4. I guess as an homage to boxing, you know. The one thing I did like about this movie is, at first it seems like he's still just like the borderline invincible guy from the first movie, but then in that last fight where he has to fight the English boxer, he actually does get his ass handed to him a little bit. So it feels like a real challenge. Ip Man 3, things get more ridiculous. Now he's just dealing with all the fucking crime in Hong Kong, including, a criminal enterprise that's being run by a foreign American, this time played by Mike Tyson, no less. And Ip Man does have to fight Mike Tyson. I believe his character's name is Frank, but he does have to fight him at one point, and it's a pretty damn good fight. But the ultimate conflict in this movie, on top of dealing with just the general crime and the corrupt nature of the British police who run the justice system in Hong Kong, he has to fight another. He kind of befriends, and then has to eventually fight another Wing Chun master by the name, what the fuck is his name? Chung Tin Chi, I guess is his name. I think that's his name, or that might be the actor's name. I don't remember. Either way, it's this other guy who knows Wing Chun, and they fight at the end in this like major duel because he starts trying to. He gets a little recognition for himself because he like worked for this criminal group at one point, and then he goes to stop them after they kidnap his son accidentally. It's just weird, and he becomes a major Wing Chun master, but then fights Ip Man and loses. And just kind of gives up martial arts at that point. That character people must have liked enough because he actually gets his own spin-off movie called Master Z, which I actually really liked. I actually liked it better than the Ip Man movies. The actor who plays him, the main character, is actually a really good martial artist, just like Donnie Yen. And his movie's cool because it has like Michelle Yeoh and Dave Bautista in it. Like Master Z has some conflict with like Chinese criminals, and then his ultimate fight in the end is again a foreigner. It follows the same a foreigner played by Dave Bautista, so it follows the same sort of formula again. I'm assuming it was made by the same people who made Ip Man because it seemed very similar, but it was just a cool little spin-off movie, which I actually really liked a lot, like I said. Um, the fourth movie is actually, he's got conflict. His wife's now dead. His wife died at the end of the third movie, and in the fourth movie, he's having conflicts with his younger son, who hates him and everything. And then, oh god damn. In the fourth movie, he has to go to the United States because he wants to get his son into a school in the United States. So he goes to San Francisco, which had a big, Chinese population move there. One of the reasons he goes is because he also goes to visit. He gets an invitation from his student Bruce Lee. I think this movie takes place in 69, 70, something like that. And Bruce Lee's already made a name for himself in the United States. He's already opened multiple martial arts schools of his own. So he goes to visit Bruce Lee, who's competing in a martial arts tournament. While there, they show Bruce Lee get into a few fights himself, but then the initial conflict with his own, with other Chinese people is he meets a martial arts society there who are willing to help him get recommendations to get his son into an American school. The problem is they want something in return. What they want in return is for Ip to convince Bruce Lee to not train foreigners in Chinese martial arts, which is something that they also brought up in the Bruce Lee biopic Dragon. That is where he ran into conflict with these Chinese elders who didn't want him teaching foreigners. So there might actually be some truth to that. But Ip Man, of course, refuses, gets into a bit of a conflict with the guy who's the head of this martial arts society. It's a lot like the second movie again, where he gets into conflict with this guy. They fight a little bit, and then they kind of become friendly. And who is the foreign element that's a problem this time? Well, like I said, he's in the United States, so it's basically the United States government. It's basically, him fighting racism, particularly in the United States military, because there's like a Chinese guy who wants to integrate Chinese martial arts into the combat training of the United States Marines, and like this drill sergeant is just so dead set against it. They only want to train karate, which I guess karate is like an Americanized form of kung fu. I'm not certain, but they only want to train karate, and they get angry at the mere suggestion of learning anything else, which is just weird. It's like, oh, another form of fighting? Let's see, maybe it'll be useful. It's like, why are you just like, no, this will never be it? It's like I said, it's like a porn. Like the fucking, it just comes off as so stupid because you just want to watch people fight. Okay, so yeah, he has conflict with that guy. But then, there's this issue of these the guy who's the head of the martial arts society has a daughter who's in high school, and she's being harassed by these white kids at the high school, and it helps her one day by beating them up. It doesn't beat them up majorly, just a little bit, but it is kind of funny. And then, but the girl who was harassing the Chinese girl, like her father is like he's like a cop or something like that, and he starts trying to get all the major Chinese people in San Francisco deported. It's basically just the racism of the United States government. It's between that and the military guys. It becomes a real issue. And then at one point, Ip Man ends up fighting the gunnery sergeant who's dead set against teaching kung fu. And the gunnery sergeant, like, beats the shit out of him a little bit. He's not quite invincible anymore. But then you realize what the timeline you're on, because it's all been Donnie Yen the whole time, and it's only been 10 years, so Donnie Yen hasn't aged that much. Plus, Asians age amazingly, so they can age 10 to 20 years, and you can't even tell sometimes. But when you look up the date and time, because I think this movie took place in the late 60s or early 70s. Either way, it really was like 70 fucking years old. 70 something years old when he had this fight against this much younger gunnery sergeant who fucks him up, and you're just imagining he's like, so everybody's just okay with this white Marine just beating the fucking shit out of this Chinese old man? Even if he is a martial artist, he's still just like a Chinese old man. Like, that's insane. I don't remember what I just said. Anyways, yeah. So yeah, he has to fight a Chinese gunnery sergeant who hands him his ass a little bit at first, but then it finally manages to beat him. But yeah, they were cool movies. Like I said, kind of lacking in story or acting or character development, but the kung fu was badass. A bit of a stylized form. There was a bit of wire work and flying through the air and doing shit like that didn't make any sense, but it all looked cool, and that's really all you want. Plus, they film with like very steady cameras. They film the fights, so it's not like American films when people fight. It's just jumping all over the place and zooming in on weird things randomly, and it just becomes so hard to follow anything that's going on. So there were honorable mentions. Oh yeah, the honorable mention I mentioned Master Z, but the other honorable mention was a movie I actually watched tonight, which is probably good that I held this off then. Was a movie called The Grandmaster, which is also very much based on Ip Man's life. It's about him, but this movie has more of an American influence on it. Like it was produced by Harvey Weinstein, who I know, and Martin Scorsese was also involved in it. So there's definitely a bit more of American influence, but it's definitely a Chinese movie. And it's weird because it's like we follow these traditions, or at least the Chinese do. This one acknowledged a few things, like it acknowledged that he had both of his sons before, or at least during, the Japanese invasion. And The movie at least mentions his daughters, if not shows them. So it's a bit more honest on the reality parts. But yeah, it has a more. That movie, The Grandmaster, has a. I mean, it definitely has a lot of martial arts in it, but it has less focus on the martial arts as the main crux of everything, even though there's still a lot of it. Also, the way they film it is a bit more of Americanized filming because, like, the camera's sort of all over the place and makes it hard to follow everything. But, yeah, good movie. Definitely different from Ip Man, though, but it's a good honorable mention. Um, so yeah, the Ip Man movies, I honestly do give them two thumbs up because they're just true to what they are. The movies get more ridiculous as they go on because who gives a fuck about the story? It's not the story that matters. It's like it's dealing with, you know, interest. It's not even dealing with interesting characters that much. It's just dealing with, like, you know, just cool kung fu shit. Just, fighting and stuff. It's So yeah, that was the honorable mention. So yeah, no, I've moved past that. So yeah, I give the Ip Man movies two thumbs up, even as they get more ridiculous as they go on, because they're really just about the martial arts, and the martial arts in these movies are badass. So yeah, I don't think there's anything more to say. No, I don't think there's anything more to say. So yeah, there's that. All right, Ip Man, good movies. Watch them if you're into kung fu, because they're some pretty cool shit. All right, have a good one, folks. See ya.